John Cage isn't just the guy who did the silent piece, however. He's notable for a number of very important musical innovations. One of these was an idea that he had started in 1938 and finally refined by 1946. It all grew out of a problem he had. As frequently is the case, necessity was the mother of invention. He had a friend who was a choreographer. She was going to perform a new dance piece in a very small space, and she wanted a percussion ensemble. Well, there was no way that Cage was going to be able to fit a whole ensemble in this little tiny space, and all they really had room for was a piano. So he developed something he called the prepared piano, which meant that he opened the piano up and jammed a bunch of stuff in the strings, little screws or rubber stoppers or corks or pieces of paper, all put in very specific spots to create very specific sounds. So when he sat down to play the piano, it didn't sound like a piano at all. It sounded like a percussion ensemble. It sounded mysterious and unpredictable. It, in effect, was decoupling the means of control of the piano from the sound source. You would play it like a regular piano and notate it like it was for regular piano, but it wouldn't sound like piano notes. A note down here might actually be lower than one up here, or vice versa. You weren't entirely sure unless you were the one who had built this thing. This is arguably an extension of Cowell's extended techniques on piano. Remember, Cage had studied with Cowell. He was familiar with these ideas. But here he is taking them to a new extreme. This isn't just an extension of piano technique. It's a replacement of piano technique. With just a few simple objects, he's turned the piano, that most ancient and almost tired of instruments, into something brand new. Please don't try this at home if you have a piano. Piano strings are under hundreds of pounds of tension, and if they snap, they can hurt you very badly, and I'm not going to be responsible. Prepared piano music is fascinating. It sounds like another instrument entirely, somewhat reminiscent of a Balinese gamelan or an entire percussion ensemble. It really has to be heard to be understood fully. Another of Cage's major innovations was the use of chants in music, in composition. Cage was studying all these Eastern religions, and one of the things that they were saying is that, look, you need to remove yourself from things. You need to subtract the composer from the artwork. Cage is also at a point where he's starting to think that any sound can be music. So if you put these two things together, you end up with a situation where you think, look, any sound being made at any time is as good as any other sound being made at any time. And rather than making a conscious choice, perhaps I'll play some sort of game. Maybe I'll roll dice to decide what notes I'm going to pick, or whether I'm going to pick notes at all. Maybe I'll deal cards, or maybe I'll use the Chinese Book of Changes, or I Ching, to determine how my score is going to go. Or perhaps I'll make a painting by tearing up little bits of paper and just dropping them on a canvas. Cage's whole method of composition with this element of chance is known as aleatoric music. It comes from the same word as dice. And dice were one of the things he used, so were flipping coins. It didn't really matter to Cage. The important part was that by making it random, he felt he was removing himself from the piece and creating some sort of absolute or beautiful music. You might think that it would sound all dissonant and out of key, but the fact is that you can be selective once you have things that are randomized. You can build a system that lets you make something that's fairly consonant using random means. It's just a question of how clever you are about it, and Cage was very clever. Using ideas like this, in 1951, Cage debuted a piece called Imaginary Landscape No. 4. And in this piece, there were 12 radios played by the performers. Well, imagine what this is like. You have 12 people on stage, and they have a score, and they have a radio. And the instructions for the score are things like making the volume of the radio louder or quieter, turning it on or off, and changing the station. So 12 people fire these things up, and there's these great billowing clouds of sound. 12 different radios, all tuned to different things. So if you play the piece once and then play it again with the same group of people following the same score, it's still going to sound completely different because the source musics that people are using that are coming across the radio are vastly different. All of Cage's ideas sort of orbit around these same themes, this notion of silence and chance and randomness. And this is what he's known for, this philosophy of music where it's not so codified and predefined and laid down. It's much more about creating a set of rules and seeing what happens, building a frame and seeing what happens to be in the frame at that particular time. Prepared piano, chance composition, radios. These are the sorts of things that make John Cage one of the most important innovators in 20th century music.